Today we're going to talk about percents. Percents are basically just a special ratio. It's a rate per 100. So in our first example, at the book fair, 40% of the books sold were science related. So for every 100 books sold, we want to know how many were science related. So in step 1, we use a model to show 40%. A 10 by 10 grid has 100 equal parts. We want to know 100 equal parts because that is 100%. So 40% means that 40 out of 100 of those equal parts. Shade in 40 parts to show our 40%. Step 2, we're going to write an equivalent ratio to show the percent. So 40% is equivalent to 40 per 100, like we showed in the diagram. So it would also be 40 over 100. Step 3, we're going to use the ratio, the fraction, to find the number of science-related books sold per 100. So we know 40% is the same thing as 40 100ths. So we would multiply that by 100 for our percent. 4,000 over 100, we would divide to simplify, and we get 40. 40 out of 100 books sold were science-related. Okay, example B. This time, in a jar of 500 beads, 30% are red. So we want to know how many of the beads are red. In step 1, we need to understand what we have to find. So basically, we are trying to find 30% of 500 to find the number of red beads. In step 2, we're going to write an expression for 30% of 500. When we look at 30% of 500, we want to think of it as it means 30% times 500. Of is the same thing as multiplication. So 30% of, or multiplied, times 500. Step 3, we're going to write the percent as a ratio. So 30% as a ratio would be 30 over 100, or that fraction 30 over 100. Step 4, we're going to simplify the expression. So we're going to take and write 30% of 500 as our multiplication problem, and we're going to substitute our ratio or our fraction for the percent. So instead of 30%, we'd write 30 over 100 times 500. Then, to be able to multiply them as fractions, we have to write the 500 as a fraction as well. So we'd put it over 1. Then we multiply our numerators and denominators. 30 times 500 gives us 15,000, and 100 times 1 gives us 100. Once we simplify that and we divide, we get an answer of 150. Another way to look at this is by using a tape diagram. So we still have the same problem. In a jar of 500 beads, 30% are red. How many of the beads are red? We're going to use a tape diagram this time. So here you can see I have a tape diagram. It is basically just a line divided up. We know that there are 500 beads, and we also know that 100% can be divided into 10 sections of 10% each. So as you see, I have taken and divided my 100% into sections of 10%. So we go 10%, 20%, 30%, all the way up to 100 to cover our diagram. Then I also know that there are 500 beads. So that 500 would be our 100%. So we write that in our 100% box, which is the furthest one to the right. Now, I have to figure out how much each square is worth. So I do that by knowing 500 is all the way to my 10th box. I have 10 boxes, so I can divide that. 500 divided by 10 gives me 50. So for each 10%, there are 50 beads. So I filled that into the chart. 50, 100, 150, 200, 250, 300, 350, 400, 450, and then 500 for our 100%. So now I can look. At 30% are red, so at 30% I have 150 beads that are red. Now you try. You can use either method. You can do it with numbers or you can try the tape diagram. Take a few minutes and work it out. So if we want to work this out using our numbers, we would take our 80%, change it to an expression, so times 500. Then I would change my percent into a fraction, 80% over 100 times 500. Oops, too many zeros. And then I would multiply. So 80 over 100 times 500 over 1 would give me 40,000 over 100. Then I would divide top and bottom by 100, and when I do, that gives me 400. So there are 400 is 80% of 500. If I were going to work this out with the tape diagram method, I would do the same thing as I did in the previous problem, and then instead of looking at the 30%, I would look at the 80%, and when I do, I can see that that is 400. Let's look at example C. I want to know what 21 is 70% of what number. So, step 1, using a tape diagram method, I'm going to make a tape diagram to model the problem. If you know the part and the percent, you can find the whole. So once again, you see I have my tape diagram. I've labeled it into 10% sections all the way to 100. It tells me that 21 is 70% of the whole. So I put my 21 in the box that's 70%. Step 2, I'm going to use the tape diagram to find the size of each part. Since I know that there are 7 equal parts up to 21, I can think what number times 7 gives me 21. In this case, it would be 3. So each part is increasing by 3. Each part is 10% on the tape diagram, so 10% of the whole is 3. So I would fill that into the box here. So you can see here in step 3 that we've completed the tape diagram. 10% of the whole is 3, so then you count by 3s to complete the diagram. So 10% is 3, 20% is 6, 30% 9, 40% 12, 50% 15, 60% 80, 70% 21, 80% 24, 90% 27, and 100% 30. So then I'll just look at the tape diagram to find my whole. 100% is the whole, which is 30. So 21 is 70% of 30. I can also work this out writing it as an equation. So I can think 21 is 70% of or multiplied by what number? Remember, of means to multiply. So then I would change my 70% to a decimal, which is 0.70. So then I would have 21 is equal to 70% or 70/100ths times what number? Then I can work backwards to find my answer. So 21 divided by 70/100ths is equal to what? When you divide that out, you get the answer of 30. So 21 is 70% of 30. Now you try. 18 is 20% of what number? Take a few minutes, work it out, and then you can check your answer. Okay, so as you can see, we want to work our way backwards. So we write it as an equation first. 18 is 20% of, multiply, what number? So then I want to take and write my percentage as a decimal. So 18 equals 0.20 or 20/100ths times some number. Then to solve this, I work backwards. 18 divided by 20/100ths is what? So then I would divide. 18 divided by 20/100ths. I can't divide by a decimal, so I move that 2 places, which means I move this 2 places and I fill in zeros. Decimal moves up. 20 will go into 180 9 times. 9 times 20 is 180. I subtract and get 0. Bring down my next 0. 20 goes into 0. 0 times. I get 0 and I subtract. So I'm left with 18 is 20% of 90. And 90 would be my answer.